history, among other things. That's always been kind of my love. And so when Allison called me, geez, way back when.
July.
Yeah. Now, did you pick this topic, or where did this topic come from?
A little birdie dropped it in my ear and thought that it would be a very relevant topic. And I said, I know a guy who can give a great talk on this.
I got a guy. Okay. Well, I think I can talk about this. In fact, I talked about this for many years in class. I started teaching church history in like '82, I think. And those first 3 years, I was just trying to figure it out. But I remember talking about the election process of the Pope. And I knew what I knew, and then it just grew as my knowledge grew over the years. And that section of it got to be pretty interesting. But then after many years of doing that, I realized that, by the time we had another election of a Pope from 1982, it was 2005. So I kept telling these kids about someday you'll go through this, you'll experience this. And geez, they were old men and women by the time I actually had it. But it is interesting, to say the least. So, I'm going to ask a question or two of you guys. You probably got a lot of them for me, but anyhow, what has to happen before we have the election of a pope? That's my question. What has to happen before the election of a pope?
We have to need a pope.
How do we need a pope?
Pope dies. Or
There
returns.
you go. The previous pope has to die. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Yes, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
As in Benedict. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's say die or resign.
Yeah.
One of the two. Well, so let's talk a little bit about a pope dying. I'm just going to throw stuff at you here. I had a good time actually researching this. So the pope dies. Now there is an appointed priest there in the Vatican who is the Pope's Chamberlain. He's probably better known by his Latin name of the Carmelengo, if you've heard that from the Dan Brown Angels and Demons and those movies. So the Pope dies. We're going to make an assumption here. He's going to die in the papal residence. The Carmelengo is summoned. He's responsible for the administration of the Vatican during the vacancy until they elect another pope. So he's essentially running the show to a certain extent. Now, he stands over the body. They summon him, he comes in, he will stand over the body and call out his baptismal name 3 times. Okay? And if there's no answer, then he says, Veri quod Papa sit mortus est. The Pope is truly dead. Okay, so we got that verified. Then, they used to, at one time, hit the Pope on the forehead with a hammer or a mallet. Okay? But they stopped doing that after Pope John the 23rd in 1963. I don't know how hard they hit him or what, but they wanted to make sure.
Make sure he's dead.
That's right. No autopsies are performed on a pope. So when Pope John I died in 1978, there was a lot of conjecture about his cause of death. Unofficially, it was a heart attack. We'll talk more about him down the road. So this is all right there happening at this time when the Pope has just died. A death certificate is written, and then the papal apartment is then sealed off. Now, for most of the past couple hundred years, they've lived in the papal apartments just separate from St. Peter's Basilica. And they seal this off by putting a ribbon, you know, on both sides of the door and sealing it with wax and the papal seal. Okay, but then the Pope's signet ring, the Pope, they always wear a ring. And it has on it an image of St. Peter. It's the symbol of authority with his name on it, and it's used as a seal whenever they're doing something official. It is destroyed at a meeting of the College of Cardinals. We'll talk more about them later. And this officially ends his pontificate. Okay, so he's dead, his pontificate is over. And that tradition is some 800 years old. Well, what about our buddy Pope Benedict, who threw a monkey wrench in the works by resigning?
Yeah.
And I mean to tell you, I can remember vividly that day I was in my bathroom shaving and I had Catholic radio on, and they came on, and the announcers, this was Catholic radio, there was this pause, and they were really confused because they had just gotten the word that he had resigned. Well, the confusion comes from the fact that we haven't had a pope resign for 400 or 500 years in the church, so nobody knew what to do. Okay, so he resigned in 2013. Well, popes never retire. There's no papal retirement home. Benedict was the first pope, my notes say, 598 years to resign. His signet ring, his papal ring, was destroyed, and after that he wore a regular ecclesial ring. So he lost his, didn't happen anymore. No pictures are taken of the deceased pope since John the 23rd. Since John Paul II, there are no photos of the Pope until he lies in state in St. Peter's. At first, the College of Cardinals are notified of the death, which is a good deal. Then the word goes out to the world, and then we find out that, what did I say? Very quod papa sit mortus est, the Pope is truly dead. Now the funeral, Ron, maybe we could check those words. Just might be a little bit better. So the funeral must be within 4 to 6 days after all of that has happened, and a mourning period of 9 days. So I don't remember if he lies in state for all 9 of those days. I think he does, but I'm not sure. But obviously, thousands upon thousands of people will come. And usually a pope will lay out plans for his funeral in advance of all of this, which is good, with the Carmelingo. So I think we could make an assumption that Pope Francis has talked to, I'll share with you in a bit here, who his Carmelingo is, that he has already sat down and made all these arrangements with him. Okay, until Pope Francis, all modern popes have resided within the Apostolic Palace adjacent to St. Peter's. I don't know if anybody's been to Rome, but you can stand right in the middle of St. Peter's Square, which is round. Must be an Italian thing. And you're looking at St. Peter's, and off to your hard right here is this quite large building, and that's the Papal Apostolic Palace, Papal Palace. And up on those top 3 windows up there was always where the popes lived, until Francis. He changed it up a little bit. But it was always cool because every Wednesday, the Pope, whether it's raining or shiny or whatever, if he's in town, he has a Wednesday audience. And anybody can went to St. Peter's Square, there might be 70, 80,000 people there. And he talks on whatever he's going to talk about. But if he's out of town, a flag would be hanging over that window of his apartment up there. So if you looked up there and you saw that papal flag up against the side of the building, you knew he was out of town. Okay, so Francis has decided to reside in the Vatican guest house called Casa Santa Marta. They named it after my wife. I'm pretty sure. When previous popes died and the body was ready, it would go out the huge bronze door of this apostolic palace, which was called the Door of Death. That was kind of interesting. And then the apostolic palace, is sealed off until the election of a new pope. Same deal. They put that cord over it and wax and all of that. The apostolic palace, I already said that. The body now goes in procession from, the apostolic palace through St. Peter's Square into the basilica. And flags are now lowered to half-staff, and all the cardinals will now wear violet instead of their traditional red. I did not know. And the reality of this is, Pope Francis is 86 years old. And one of these days, we're going to be going through all of this again. Unlike my students back in the 80s, I don't think you have to wait 20 years or whatever. Okay, the Carmelengo, the Chamberlain, is now in charge of the church, but he will make no decisions about faith or morals. So he's just an administrator, basically, at this point. I think that'd be the scariest thing in the world, to have that thrown on you under these circumstances. Cardinali, the cardinals, will start arriving from all over the world, coming to Rome, if they're not already there. The Swiss Guard will treat all of the cardinali as if they were or will be the next pope. So they're going to get all the courtesies. They don't know. Nobody knows. Now after that period of mourning, 9 days of mourning, it will be 15 days until the start of the conclave. Well, how come so long? Well, it used to be 18 days. But if you push the clock back a couple hundred years, Pope dies, they're going to summon all the cardinals. They got to come from wherever in the world, and think of modes of transportation in those days. It might have taken them 2.5 weeks to get there. But now it's 15 days. Actually, they could be there next day with today's travel, but they still keep it. And there's a reason for that. Okay, now when the Pope is buried, it is with 3 bags of coins. I don't know this either. Copper coins, silver, and gold. And the number of coins in each bag will equal the number of years that the Pope served. This is the only money / salary that the Pope will ever receive when he's dead.
He's dead.
And he's taking it with him.
There is no salary for being the Pope. And you contrast that with, I don't know, President of the United States gets $400,000 every year. The Pope gets nothing. And the Pope will be buried, I have that in italics for a reason, will be buried in 3 caskets. The first one is cypress. The second one is lead, with the name of the Pope etched in the lead and the number of years that he served. Okay, and then a third casket is elm, and that is nailed shut. Now I'm saying buried because most of the recent popes of modern era are somewhere in St. Peter's Basilica. When when Pope John Paul died, they put him down below in the crypt down below. Martha and I have been there several times, and it's not creepy. There's nothing creepy about this. It's just that word crypt, It's a beautiful place down there. But so many people wanted to see John Paul's grave, his casket down there, that they eventually moved it back up on the main floor, where it sits today. The Pope will not be cremated, even though the church has changed that for you or I. Popes will not be cremated. So there have been 266 popes since Peter, and around 150 of them are buried outside of the Vatican. You know, some not even in Rome, in various places. So just a couple things here. An average pope serves for 7.5 years. I did the math myself. 266. So 7.5 years. But who do you think would have been the longest serving pope? I thought I knew, and I found out I was wrong. Well,
John Paul's.
Well, okay, it was Pius IX from 1846 to 1878, 32 years.
Whoa.
John Paul was 27 years. Okay? Now, if we throw Peter in there, there's a little ambiguity in there. It's going to be 30-something, but we're not for positive when Peter was martyred. So it's kind of hard to run the numbers when you don't know his death date. Okay, so who was, if not the shortest serving pope? Well, I think he was the shortest serving pope. Who was that?
The one that got assassinated in the car.
No. Got assassinated?
I'm impressed you know that.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Oh, you took, well, that was John Paul, and it was an attempted assassination.
Oh.
He didn't die, so.
Good answer.
You know the answer to this, and?
John the First?
Yes,
Yeah.
Pope John the First.
Because he didn't last but a month.
So Paul VI dies in 1978. They had all of this go on in the conclave, and they elect John the First, Pope John
Yeah.
Paul the First.
John Paul.
John Paul the First. And he did that because he wanted to continue the work of the previous two popes, John the 23rd and Paul the 6th. He wanted to continue their work, and so he never had before. He took this double name. Okay, but he was only the pope. You remember how long, Anna?
Like a month, wasn't it?
20 some days.
33 days.
Yeah.
33 days, and he died. You know, it's a massive undertaking to do all of this, and they did it, elected a guy, in 33 years, 33 days later, he dies, and they gotta do it all over again. So,
Some people said, whoops, they need to come back. I remember hearing that. Oh, that's the wrong guy.
okay. All right, so we've done that part of it. The Pope is dead. Mortus est. So now let's talk a little bit about the conclave, the election of the Pope. This Pope is dead and buried. How do we go about the election of a new Pope? Well, this discussion is going to be in the context of the most recent conclave, which was 2013. So we'll see. The next one, there might be a few little tweaks to it. And the election, it's the context of the conclave, March 2013. And the election of Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who took the name of Francis in 2013. So, some history of the conclave. A mysterious and secretive rite dating back many centuries. However, let's take a brief look at papal elections during the first millennium, first 1,000 years. Not always elections. Sometimes the Pope was selected by various means, sometimes entirely secular, such as appointments by the Holy Roman Emperor. So there's a lot of politics involved, and I mean, we could be here for 3 weeks if we want to get into all that. And it's fascinating. But not until 1059, when Pope Nicholas II issued the papal bull, Okay, what is a papal bull? Everybody envisions an animal and everything. The word bull comes from the Latin word bullus, which means bulletin or notification. I mean, even yet today, Rome will send out papal bulls about some particular whatever. It's pretty official. And I think they're still in Latin. But anyhow, Nicholas II issues this one called In Nomine Domini. That an actual election by cardinals was established. That's what this papal bull did. The first pope elected by a college of cardinals was Pope Alexander II in 1061, all around the same time period. It was an election and a pope was made, but it really wasn't a conclave per se. That won't happen for another couple hundred years. So conclave, that very word, comes from two Latin words, you might know this, cum and clavis. Cum means with, clavis means key. Okay, so with key. What's that all about? What inspired the conclave came in 1268. This is great. When Pope Clement V died, God rest his soul, Pope Clement died. The Cardinali are going to meet at the Papal Palace, not in Rome at this one, but in Viterbo, Italy. For whatever reasons, they couldn't decide on a pope. I mean, for 6 months they couldn't decide. For a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. No pope. They can't make the decision. Well, how come? Well, my suspicion is, this is kind of my somewhat educated opinion. Remember, they come from all over the world, these cardinals, and there would have been fewer of them at this time. But some of them come from some really not very nice places, I'm sure. And they get to Italy, now this is Viterbo, but it could have been Rome or whatever. And this is pretty nice. We're kind of liking this. So, no big hurry. We'll take our time here. I might not have to be back right away. So it was taking a long time, and the Roman people were not dealing well with this. Okay, the local citizens were, come on already. And finally, they said amongst themselves, basta, enough. I think basta means enough in both Italian and in Spanish. Okay, now, I don't know, Ron, if you ever probably heard this story, but that helps. This has nothing to do with the election of the Pope. But many years ago, I found myself in a place called Vietnam, and I was there at a large air base. And there was, one of the guys I ran into on a daily basis was this Italian kid from New Jersey. Okay, and unlike most people I've met from New Jersey, he was kind of a nice kid. I suppose I got 5 people in there. Anyhow, Frank, he was one of those guys, I was a little bit older than he was, and I just kind of had fun teasing him. And one day he's there, and I'm saying, Frank, do you realize, now Basta is B-A-S-T-A. I says, do you realize what you would have if you added 2 letters to your name? If you added an R and a D? And he's sitting there thinking, what are you doing? He threw something at me. Anyhow, so one night we had a rocket attack. And I don't know that anybody was seriously hurt. I'll tell you what was hurt was the Airmen's Club. Had a direct hit on the Airmen's Club, and that really upset people. But I saw Frank the next day, and he came in and he's got a gauze wrapped around his forearm. And I said, Frank, what's going on? What happened? He says, shrapnel. He says, says, I'm gonna get a Purple Heart. And I said, Frank, are you serious? I got a little cut on your arm and so I don't know if Frank got his Purple Heart or not. I haven't seen him, but every time I see this, it makes me think of my good buddy. Okay, anyhow, back to what we're talking about. So the Romans were very impatient after 3 years, understandably. So they're going to lock the Cardinali in. This was done by a group, they were referred to as Marshals of the Conclave. Probably a very, very early version of Swiss Guard. And they kept them from leaving, so they're confined. Ergo, conclave with key, okay? Well, they still dilly-dally and didn't elect a pope. So after several weeks of that, so the Romans went the next step, and they're going to take the roof off of the building. Okay, you guys want to be in there? We're going to lock you in. You got no roof. If it rains, you're going to get wet. Okay, and then they started feeding them bread and water. Okay. 3 days. 3 days we had a new pope. And that guy was Gregory the 10th. And so it says all future meetings of cardinals became known as conclaves. And the Second Council of Lyon in the year 1274 decreed that at future conclaves they will be locked in, cum clavis, to eliminate any outside forces from influencing the election. And they still do that to this day. And for pretty much the same reason. The first conclave held in the Sistine Chapel was in the year 1492. Okay, got that, I think. Got that. Now we're going to get down to brass tacks here. So, cardinals are summoned to Rome. Popes are chosen by the College of Cardinals, the Church's most senior officials, who are appointed by the Pope and are usually ordained bishops. You might not realize that. Most cardinals, there might be an exception, but they are ordained a bishop prior to that sometimes. They are summoned to a meeting at the Vatican, which is followed by the papal election or the conclave. Well, in the world today, there are currently 244 cardinals from approximately 69 countries. The rules of the conclave were changed in 1975, a little bit after you graduated from high school, to include all cardinals over the age of 80 from voting. Okay, so if you're 80 or over, you're going to be a part of this to a point, but you're not going to be one of the electors. The maximum number of cardinal electors is 120. So only 120 out of the 244 will actually vote. And a lot of those are retired, they're over the age of 80. By the way, cardinals retire at age 80. Priests at 70, bishops at 75, cardinals at 80. So, and everybody knows that anybody over 80 is not worth anything at all. So.
Exactly.
I can say that. Pardon me?
How old are you?
Well, let's just say I'm over 80. I wouldn't be able to vote if they decide to make me a cardinal. So, of those 244, 13 are from the United States. So we have 13 American cardinals. 5 are in the Vatican, assigned to various things. One of them you're going to meet here shortly. 8 are active, okay? And that would include Daniel Cardinal DiNardo, our former bishop of Houston, Galveston. So another conclave pops up sometime in the future. We could very well see Cardinal DiNardo as one of the electors. Okay? So during the time between the Pope's death or resignation and the election of his successors, the College of Cardinals will govern the church, headed by who? They're going to govern the church. Remember that name I used? Carmelingo. Well, this is interesting. I don't think I knew this. The current Carmelingo is Kevin Joseph Farrell from the United States, who was chosen by Francis in 2019 to be his Carmelingo.
Is that a cardinal too?
Yes, I didn't say that. Yes, Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell. I don't know exactly, he's from the East Coast somewhere. I can't remember where.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So in his job, the Carmelingo, to supervise the whole election process, with secret votes being held 4 times daily inside the Vatican Sistine Chapel. So just so you know, I'm standing here in St. Peter's Square, okay? St. Peter's is right here, all right? You got those big apostolic palace where the Pope lives right here, and right in between, kind of nondescript, is the Sistine. Has anybody been there? Okay, is the Sistine Chapel. From the outside, it just looks like a great big brick building. It doesn't look that impressive. Step inside and it changes. So then, during the conclave, cardinals reside within the Vatican. Vatican is walled. I think it's 26 acres, if I'm not mistaken. It is walled off, and they reside there and are not permitted any contact with the outside world. I'll mention that here and I'll emphasize that. It says during this period, all the cardinals, retirees are included. So this would be the funeral, the 9 days of mourning, and then those 15 days before the conclave. So it says all the cardinals, retirees included, will begin to discuss in strict secrecy the merits of the likely candidates. Just sitting around smoking cigars. Well, really, they're just, what do we call it?
Vetting.
Huh?
Vetting. Vetting.
Well, vetting, yeah. Intermingling, just getting to know each other. A lot of these guys don't, they're from all over the world. The cardinals do not have to choose one of their own number. Here's a fun fact. Theoretically, any baptized male Catholic can be elected pope. It could be. But tradition says that they will almost certainly give the job to a cardinal. Now, I mentioned the number of cardinals. When we, I'm not going to talk about that now. When we go back to the 1960s and early 70s, the College of Cardinals was heavily Italian. I think it's always kind of been that way. I suspect it's still that way today. There have always been more Italians, and as a result, for the past 400 and some years, every pope has been Italian until 1978. Okay, I'll tell you this now. There's a movie out there. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend it. It's 1968, and it's called The Shoes of the Fisherman. Maybe you saw it somewhere. It's worth the watch. Okay, and the whole scenario, this is 1968, okay, when this movie was made. And the whole scenario is that the Pope has died, and the world's on the brink of nuclear warfare and all of that. And they want a Pope that, can figure out how to get out of this mess. So there is a guy who is in a gulag in Russia. In Siberia. He's a priest. He's a bishop, and he's a priest in prison. Okay? And they run some things through. The Russian premier thinks it would be good to have this guy be part of the conclave. So they get him freed up, and this happens like in a day. They get him freed up, somebody makes him a cardinal, they send him to Rome, and he's part of the conclave. And remember, this guy's come from like 20 years in the gulag. And so it's obviously a cultural thing and all of that. Long story short, when they get to the voting, they elect him. Okay, and that was a great big controversial thing. First non-Italian pope in 430 or whatever years in this movie. And then he goes on and he does wonderful things. 10 years later, 1978, Pope John Paul I dies. We have another conclave, and they elect a Polish pope, who was the first non-Italian pope in 400 and whatever years. And you know how that story played out. So and the reason I love this movie is they've got some great reenacted scenes of the inner workings of the conclave. Because we'll never know what goes on in there. But this movie has some great scenes in there. But anyhow, I digressed a little bit. I can't remember where I was. So you could be the Pope. Okay, but although open campaigning is forbidden during that 15 or whatever day deal, a papal election is still a highly political process. There's no politics, but it's a highly political process. Okay. The coalition builders have about 2 weeks to forge alliances, and senior cardinals who may themselves have little chance of becoming a pope can still exert a considerable influence over the others. So at this time, all the cardinals are together, even the retired ones and all of that. The election of the Pope is conducted in conditions of secrecy unique in the modern world. Very. So the election process can take days or years. In previous centuries, it has gone on for weeks or months, and some cardinals have even died during a conclave. I remember distinctly this last conclave, 2013. They had 120 electors, and they were in conclave, and one of them didn't die, but he had some serious health problems, and they had to take him out, and he did not come back. Okay, I mean, physically he could have come back, but once he left the conclave, he couldn't come back, and they didn't replace him, so they went with 119. The process is designed to prevent any of the details of the voting emerging either during or after the conclave. The threat of excommunication hangs over anyone tempted to break this silence. Pope John Paul II changed the rules of the conclave so a pope could be elected by a simple majority. So when he died, that's what they did. And they elected Benedict. Benedict changed it back. It says he changed the requirements back so that a 2/3 majority is required. So assume that's where it is today. Before the voting begins in the Sistine Chapel, the entire area is checked by security experts to ensure that there are no hidden microphones or cameras or whatever else we got these days. They do a massive sweep of these areas. Once the conclave has begun, the cardinals eat, vote, and sleep within closed-off areas until a new pope has been chosen. Now, prior to Francis, okay, that was always within the Sistine building, which the chapel, it's a huge chapel, is part of that. So all of these electors and supporting cast would go in there and stay there overnight. They made little cubicles all over the place. Well, with the election of Francis, they moved it to the guest house where Pope Francis currently lives, Casa Santa Marta. And so we'll see on TV them walking from the Casa over to the Sistine. But they're not within earshot, nobody can yell at them, it's absolute secrecy. They are allowed no contact with the outside world, barring a medical emergency. All radios, television sets are removed, no newspapers, magazines allowed in, and mobile phones are banned. 2 doctors are allowed into the conclave, as well as priests who are able to hear confessions in various languages, and the housekeeping staff. So you got to get this picture. It's going to be in the Sistine building, right? Okay, so you've got the 120. Now you have these other people, hospitality, doctors, whatever. They come in also. Now they're not going to be part of the voting, okay, as we see here. It says all these staff have to swear an oath promising to observe perpetual secrecy and undertake not to use sound or recording equipment or anything like that. Voting is held in the Sistine Chapel, where everything is conducive to an awareness of the presence of God, in whose sight each person will one day be judged. On the day the conclave begins, the cardinals celebrate Mass in the morning before walking in procession to the chapel. So you can see them walking. Once the cardinals are inside the conclave area, they have to swear an oath of secrecy, then the Latin command. And they do this really well in that Shoes of the Fisherman movie. One of the cardinals gets up and says loudly in Latin, extra omnes, all out. Okay, so all those doctors or hospitality, they have to leave, not the Sistine building, they just have to leave this area. And then they'll pull these big bronze doors shut on themselves, and then on the other side there's another set that they'll pull shut, and then they lock them. They lock them with the key, cum clavis. Okay, they are locked in. The cardinals have the option of holding a single ballot on the afternoon of the first day. For the second day, 2 ballots are held in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Now this we all know about the smoke and all that. Huh? It says the paper ballot is rectangular, like so. Printed on the upper half are the words Legio in Summum Pontificem, I elect as Supreme Pontiff. Below is a space for the name of the person chosen. So you get this ballot, you write your choice in there, but they are instructed to write the name in a way that does not identify them. So if I've got a flamboyant way of writing, I'm going to have to print it or do something that wouldn't be recognizable. And then they fold the paper twice. Okay? After the votes have been cast, the papers are mixed, counted, and opened. Before they do that, they make their ballot, and I think they still do this, in the Sistine Chapel. There's an altar at one end. It's kind of a nondescript altar. And they have it on the top of the altar, a big chalice, okay, with a big paten, almost like a plate on top of it. And each cardinal goes up with his ballot, and he reads a prayer in Latin. I don't know exactly what all it says. And then they put their thing in there and put the paten back on it and go sit down. So they've done all of that, and then they are counted 3 times. There are 3 people that are counting these ballots. As the papers are counted, one of the scrutineers calls out the names of those cardinals who have received votes. For His Eminence, Cardinal Schultz, 29 votes. For His Eminence, so-and-so, 25 votes. He pierces each paper with a needle through the word Eligio, placing all the ballots on a single thread. The ballot papers are then burned, giving us smoke visible to onlookers outside, which traditionally turns from black to white once a new pope has been elected. In this last one, with Francis, it came out black. And everybody's thinking, man. But then it started getting a little gray, and then pretty soon it was white. And that's by design. I didn't realize that. Okay. Damp straw was once added to the stove. And then, by the way, that stove's just not a fancy stove at all. And I can tell you, Martha can back me up on this one. I stood in St. Peter's Square. There's the Sistine Chapel, and I am looking and trying to find that chimney. And even if you know, it's not a fancy chimney at all, it's just a chimney. And people will come up to me and say, yeah, don't you see it? It's right there. And eventually I say, oh yeah, I never saw it. I know it's there. Okay. But over the years, there has often been confusion over the color of the smoke. More recently, a dye has been used. If a second vote is to take place immediately, the ballots from the first vote are put on one side and then they are put to one side and then burned together with those from the second vote. The process continues until one of the candidates has achieved the required majority. If after 3 days of balloting nobody has gained a 2/3 majority, voting is suspended for a maximum of 1 day to allow a pause for prayer, informal discussion, and what is described as a brief spiritual exhortation by the senior cardinal in the order of deacons. I don't think that means there's deacons as we know them there. And so I didn't realize that after, what did I say, 3 days? Times 1 day pause. 3 days. They take a time out and take a day off. At the end of the election, a document is drawn up giving the results of the voting at each session. So this is all tabulated, how the votes went and everything. And it is handed over to the new pope. It is kept in an archive in a sealed envelope, which can be opened only on the orders of the pope. The only clue about what is going on inside the Sistine Chapel is the smoke that emerges twice a day from burning the ballots. Black signals failure, we know that. Traditional white smoke means a new pope has been chosen. After the election of the new pope has been signaled by white smoke rising from that chimney that I can never see, there will be a short delay before his identity is revealed to the world. Okay, that's true. If you'll recall, it was, better part of an hour or so before we found out. Because we'd seen the smoke, and now he's just hanging on. Come on, what are they doing? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing. It says, once one candidate has attained the required majority, he is then asked in Latin, acceptanze electionem de te canosse factum in suum pontificem. Do you accept your canonical election as supreme pontiff? And he can say yes or no. And if he says no, we'll never know. I mean, we're not going to know that. Pretty sure that at that point, by that point in time, that he would say yes. So if he says yes, and it says, having given his consent, the new pope is asked, quo nomine vis vocare? How do you choose to be called? Okay, and at that time. So he's going to have to, I suppose all the cardinals are told to have a name in mind that you're going to be called. after he has chosen to name the other cardinals. Now this is played out in that movie very well. And they don't do this anymore. But if you can envision rows of cardinals on either side of the chapel. And they sit there, and prior to the 1960s, or I'm not sure when they changed this, every cardinal had way up above his head a canopy, a red canopy sticking out. And so at that time, when he says, quo nomine vis vocare, how you choose to be called, all the other cardinals would reach around and pull a cord, and it would drop all of their canopies down, except the one of the newly elected. When they do that in the movie, that's really pretty cool. And then the cardinals will line up, one by one, I say, two at a time, going up. The newly elected will go from there and sit on a chair, and they come up and they will congratulate him and give him their obedience. And I would think that's a very emotional. This is brother cardinals coming together at that time. So the new pope has to, again, we don't know, we're still waiting. New pope has to be fitted into his new papal robes. And so as you stand in the Sistine and you look off on that far side, I knew this, and that door had a special meaning to me. Kind of like those doors there, okay? Not huge, but right there. And there's this door off to the side, and now the newly elected goes in there, and on the other side is the papal tailor, okay? And he will have prepared garments to dress the Pope of any size, small, medium, or large, but some last-minute adjustments may have to be made. You know, just good enough to get him up on the balcony, and then they can do all kinds of things. Okay, so from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the traditional announcement will echo around the square. Before I tell you that, what happens, the other thing that happens is when the white smoke, and we finally determine that, the bell, how many churches there are with bells in Rome. And that's pretty impressive. It's a great time to be a Catholic. It really is. Anyhow, so the announcement will echo around the square, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. I announce to you a great joy. We have a pope. Okay, and at that time, lots of change. St. Peter's Square can hold 250,000 people. Okay, and then you have this street that runs off of St. Peter's called the Via Conciliazione, and it goes down this wide street, and there will be people down there. You know, literally hundreds of thousands of people. Once that white smoke goes, Romans emerge from every crack and every place. They all come there. Okay. His name is then revealed. So he will go to that balcony. He has to go from the Sistine. He must be away. We don't see this. He goes over into St. Peter's, up to that balcony, and he steps out. And Carmelengo or somebody will announce to the world his name in Latin, of course. It says his name is then revealed, and the newly elected pontiff will make his first public appearance. And at that time, even before they say his name, everybody is, you know, some people will know who this guy is, and most of us probably won't. After saying a few words, the Pope will give the traditional blessing of Urbi et Orbi to the city and to the world, and a new pontificate will have begun. And that's it. Okay? So, it's like I said, I stand on that. I think it's a great time to be a Catholic. And to just live through that and know that the tradition and the history, and this isn't all of it. This is just the stuff on the surface. So it's a pretty cool time. Questions?
What happens to the pennies?
Say again?
What happens